I've had a long love affair with Australian bush recitations or poems. I like the word recitations. Uh, they played such an important part in our entertainment history. It's great that the bush poetry tradition continues, people writing poems in the galloping style about contemporary issues. Some are funny, some are tragic, but it's still a tradition that's evolving. But of course, it all started with the much older verse. Here's a poem called Jim the Boss Rider. It's a it's a poem that I took down from a chap when I first started collecting. Clary Peters lived on the south coast of New South Wales at Austinmere. He'd been a horsebreaker and had a great love of anything that had to do with horse poetry, we'll call it that. An outlaw horse is a wild one that's determined not to be ridden. And if I haven't done some of these poems for quite a long time, so I'm stretching my brain. He'd come to Numarella in the drought of '98 that had turned the narrow plains to a sea of sand, and the philanthropic super, feeling pity for his state, had given him a start as extra hand. Now, he must have been a marvel, for at night he'd sit for hours and boast of the marvellous things he'd seen and done, how he'd won the Axeman's Trophy at the show at Charters Towers and danced with a Syrian hawker just for fun. Well, we had a horse, an outlaw, out on Numarella run. No stronger beast had ever stretched the reins. He'd thrown Monaro Billy and the station breaker done, and he was reckoned pretty bad throughout the southern plains. Well, the boss came down this morning. We'd planned the joke, you see. "I've letters here must catch the mail," said he. "You'd better take 'em, Jimmy. You can take the chestnut colt, but mind you, she'll have you on your head." Well, Jim threw on the saddle, and the horse, well, stood like a sheep. One moment we thought our joke had failed, but Jim was barely seated when that horse put down his head and belted at it like a demon through the rails. Well, we made a dash for horses, and our eyes we opened wide to see Jim like a perfect horseman ride. He'd bring that stock whip round him every time that horse would rise, and he'd tease him with the bleeders when he lit. Yeah, we made a dash for horses, and when we reached the clump of grass where we'd seen them last, both horse and man had disappeared from view. Well, for miles and miles of tracks we followed, horsemen going to and fro from the cattle camps at Kindred to those farms on Little Cove. We searched that rugged country in despair. Well, the days to weeks had passed, and still no news had come to hand, and all agreed perforce that all was lost, till a party, searching eastward, found some hoof prints in the sand, and all agreed a horse had lately crossed. On a level piece of country, out beyond the Londaroo, hemmed in with mountains wide and gorges deep, we found our chestnut colt, still bucking as he'd ever knew, and Jim astride him, fast asleep.